2012, key stakeholders from financial services organizations had candid discussions with the Premier and Minister of Finance, Dr. the Honorable D. Orlando Smith, OBE, to map out the work that needed to be done to strengthen the Virgin Islands financial services industry. Several government-led initiatives, including the latest effort assisted by leading global management consultants, have resulted in a major review to help sustain, diversify, and strengthen our financial services industry. On this program, we provide part 1 in a recap series of the feature edition Public Eye aired on November 18th, where LORNA Smith, BRODRICK PENN, Neil Smith, and GERARD FARARA QC, all members of the Financial Services Steering Committee, discussed the government's plans to build a thriving and sustainable financial services sector. At this time, I'd like to do a special welcome to our guests. Thank you for being on our program. Welcome.
Thank you.
Mr. Farara, financial services, a key industry in our economy and contributes more than approximately 60% to our government revenue and everything else. But what does the term financial services really mean? And most people think money when they hear it. Can you give us a definition for the term financial services? And
yes, thank you very much for that question, Nadia. It's one which I suppose I haven't myself given a very in-depth contemplation to, but certainly the financial services sector is a very important sector of our economy. As you rightly said, it contributes to in excess of 60% of our annual revenues, and that makes it the leading sector in the BVI, having surpassed tourism some years ago. And we are not alone in this regard. There are many, many countries throughout the world that have what is referred to as a financial services sector. And essentially within that sector, a range of services are offered depending on which country you're dealing with. A range of services are offered. Here in the BVI, our financial services sector, of course, had its birth with the International Business Companies Act. And our primary initiative following from the passage into law of that act has been, of course, the incorporation of international business companies. So as that terminology suggests, we are in the business of producing certain legal entities or vehicles which can be utilized in transactions and acquisitions and a range of business matters throughout the world. And essentially what financial services mean, or some people refer to it as global business services, is that you seek to provide within your country the legislative framework, the vehicles and the means by which persons outside your jurisdiction can utilize your legislation, utilize those vehicles, and provide for their needs as business persons and international business persons throughout the world. So it's a very, very important sector. Of course, there are many other aspects to financial services other than the incorporation of companies, and we'll talk a bit more about that later on.
You spoke to the fact that it's incorporations. Can you give us some examples of BVI companies in this regard?
Well, the BVI really has surpassed all other jurisdictions in the world in terms of the incorporation of companies. I think up to 2013, we had 480,000 companies registered in the BVI. And that is by far in excess of any, the incorporations that you have in any other country in the world. And that really says a lot for the BVI as a jurisdiction, and for the type of legislation that we have in place, and also the type of regulatory framework which we've had to put in place in relation to that particular sector. I think at one point in the BVI, we were certainly incorporating annually in the range of 50,000 new companies per annum. And that is an extremely significant number. None of our competitors within the Caribbean or even in the wider world came close to that. So the incorporation of these international business companies, where essentially those companies are not doing business in the BVI, but are conducting some form of business activity elsewhere, whether it be as part of a very elaborate corporate structure, or whether it be the ownership of property elsewhere, or whether it be a one-time transaction. Those companies incorporated in BVI have been deployed throughout the world in providing the vehicle that was necessary in those various structures and acquisitions.
Nadia, if I may, and just give an example of how a BVI company is used. And by the way, I'm the chairman of the Financial Services Business Development Committee. Granted, a big mouthful, but, but I think it's important to make that clear. But to give an example of how a BVI company is used. And I can use this example because, Jerry, it was very well publicized in a number of journals. A company, in fact, the largest trading company, petroleum trading company in the world, Rosneft, wanted to acquire shares in TKN BP, British Petroleum, we all know. And the lawyers here used a BVI company to acquire those shares. The Rosneft and TKN BP, they are a Russian company, I believe. And the amount of money we're talking about is $55 billion. Those shares were bought for. Later on, I hope there'll be a chance to talk about how that sort of translates into business, or how it positively impacts everybody in the British Virgin Islands. But you know, that gives, I think, a good example of how BVI companies are used. And as Jerry said, there are any number of activities aside from holding companies and incorporations that BVI companies are used for.
Thank you, Mrs. Smith. Based on the example that you just provided and the context of the financial services, we know that government has done quite a bit of work to ensure that we have a very strong legislative framework. Can you talk more about this work and what has been done?
Well,
My panel?
I think, yeah, probably I can help with that for us. Now, there's quite a bit of things that have been happening.
Yes.
In January of 2012, the Premier launched an initiative to consult, have some discussions with the private sector and the public sector as well, the entire spectrum of who is touched and who works with the financial services in BVI, and produced a report from which we developed an action plan. In that action plan, we had a couple issues that we decided that we need to address. One of them, which I think everyone has seen, is education. You see now that we have a financial services curriculum in the schools, right? That I think was fast-tracked as a result of that particular initiative. We also, some of the things that came up was to aggressively deal with the international initiatives that are coming at us. FATCA, for example, there was a deliberate, very consistent and aggressive effort to get that dealt with. There was also the G5 pilot program, which has been eclipsed by things like the Multilateral Convention. So we've been dealing with all of those things. So even, for example, in the Ministry of Finance, where we've been concentrating on a lot of the tax initiatives outside, most of those things, even though we would do them automatically anyway, those things are done in the context of a wider strategy. And you know, so there's the education part, but there's also an effort, and I'm not so sure, well, there is the Financial Services Business Development Committee that Ms. Smith is involved in, the leads, chairs, came about as a result of that effort as well. And it's, all of these things are important because the financial services industry in the BVI, or as some people call it, the international business, business services, is quite an important facet of our society, and it is responsible for, in a large extent, for the standard of living that we enjoy today. So it's very important that each and every person out there appreciate. They might not understand the intricacies of the industry, but at least they should appreciate the role that it plays in the BVI economy.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. Mr. Penn.
Well, continuing from where Neil left off, I think it's important to understand the context within the progression of work that has occurred over the past couple of years. I think Neil spoke about the initial effort that the government undertook when they first came to office as early as January 2012. But subsequent to that, there was another significant effort in terms of taking a critical look at our financial services industry. We like to dub it the Wadham Report. But effectively, that was an effort that was chaired by a gentleman that's a friend to the BVI, and it was an effort also that was undertook in consultation with the private sector industry. What the government did, what the Premier did, is that he convened a panel of experts from various disciplines within the financial services industry, and undertook a one-day retreat where we went and we took some very hard and critical looks at what's happening within our financial services industry. And coming out of that, we produced a report effectively that was themed in a tripartite way. We concluded that we needed to do three things. We needed to adapt, we needed to develop, and we needed to educate. Interestingly, the education theme was clearly recurring from some of the work that was undertaken. That was quite pivotal in what we're doing in terms of developing our financial services industry. In addition, under the theme of developing, that signaled that we needed to do some new things within our financial services industry. We needed to ensure that we try to develop more substance, try to develop value added. And in terms of adapting, again, that related to making sure that we deal swiftly and timely with the international initiative. So effectively, we have to adapt our regime to suit where the global trends were going. And so we had this comprehensive report styled under those three themes that suggested that we needed to do those three key things. So that was effectively what we like to call the middle effort and the Wadham report within the continuum of efforts that the government has been undertaking for the past couple of years.
Thank you, Mr. Penn. Mr. FARARA, would you like to add to Mr. Penn's example?
Yes, certainly. I think I suppose this brings us to some degree to the most recent initiative, which has been launched, in which I'm a member of the steering committee of the initiative, where again consultants were brought in, and they were given the task to, as it were, consult with not only persons within the government or within the Financial Services Commission, but also particularly to consult with persons from the private sector, those who are involved on a day-to-day basis in dispensing these services that are provided under the banner of financial services. And a steering committee, of course, was put in place, and there was another committee, which a much larger committee, where the input from the practitioners within the financial services sector were brought to bear, and they were members of the committee and well represented. And that initiative, of course, has borrowed from the various initiatives which Neil and BRODRICK mentioned a few minutes ago in their responses. Apart from borrowing from those initiatives, it was an opportunity for a number of additional ideas and suggestions to be made and input to be had. And that has been done, and the report is now in its very final stages. And I think that is a very key initiative which has been launched by the government and which is designed ultimately to not only take another look at this matter, but to come up with concrete proposals and, most importantly, to put in place the mechanism for driving those initiatives forward in a meaningful and successful way, whereby the BVI would begin to reposition itself within the global spectrum of the financial services industry in preparation for the future of the industry and the sustainability of the industry in the BVI.
If you are joining us for the first time, I am GIS Information Officer Nadia James Harris, and my special guests are Lorna Smith, Chair of the Financial Services Business Development Committee, Acting Permanent Secretary in the Premier's Office, BRODRICK PENN, Financial Secretary in the Ministry of Finance, Neil Smith, and member of the Financial Services Steering Committee, Mr. GERARD FARARA, QC. Prior to our break, Mr. Penn, you were speaking about some of the work that was done in the financial services sector. We spoke about the Wadham report. Mrs. Smith, would you like to comment on that?
Yes, certainly. Thank you very much. I would just like to add that Mr. Wadham was he was a friend of the BVI indeed, but he was more than that. He was one of the external commissioners on the Financial Services Commission board, who lives in Hong Kong. He lives all over the world, but he's based in Hong Kong. And so he has a very intimate understanding of financial services and the BVI financial services in particular. What he did was, after the first exercise that the financial secretary described, what he did was he led, in fact, he was invited by the Premier to have a retreat of 2 days with 9 people from the financial services industry, including the private sector again, because they are so vital. And they had a discussion for that 2 days, and came up with, I believe, as Broderick said, they came up with 3 areas, or Mr. Wadham came up with 3 areas that we needed to do, which was to adapt, to develop, and to educate. I should say also that he was concentrating on his remit, or the remit of that group, was to look at the sustainability of the subsectors, you know, whether it's funds, whether it's in corporations, whether it's insurance, whatever, to look at each subsector and the sustainability of those sectors. And the conclusions were the 3 that we named. If I could take very briefly what he meant by each one. Adapt. The FS talked about what we're doing with FATCA. He said he saw that coming down the road, and all the international initiatives, the OECD and all the other ones that were coming down. So he saw the need for us to of course, to respond to those by adapting. We couldn't just continue as we were. And the other one, to develop. Yes, we continue with our bread and butter, or in corporations, or 480,000 that we had. But while we did that, we also had to try to find more viability. We had to find more substance, as has been said. The other point he made was that we ought to be very proud of our financial services. The fact that 60 cents out of every dollar that the government spends comes from financial services, we should applaud it. And we shouldn't just waste that money. We should spend some of that very money to develop our financial services. So that's what he meant by developing. Yes, we spend it on our needs, but we spend some to also develop our services further to get the sustainability that we need. And educate. Educate, not just in terms of educating locally, that is very crucial, because he also, the other thing he saw was for British Virgin Islanders to become very much engaged at the top level, at every level, from bottom to top, in our financial services. So he saw the need for us to educate through use of the agencies like the Financial, the FSI. What is it?
Services Institute.
Financial Services Institute, thank you very much. A senior moment. Through the Financial Services Institute, the college, whatever we have, we use that for educating. And we should educate beyond the BVI, educate internationally. Educate even in terms of the standards, international standard setters, let them know that we have signed on, committed long ago to doing whatever is needed to keep our industry as it should be, to promote ourselves and so on. So, as has been said, what is being done here now, today, is very much a continuation of a very dynamic process that started in 2012.
You've spoken about bread and butter. We've heard the twin economic pillars. We've heard that financial services is what helps to make the BVI economy, and the importance of the various reviews, including the Wadham review. But how is this relationship, how does this affect the average person living in the territory, the student going to school? We know we have financial services within the education sector, but the average man on the street, how does it affect them?
I think that's an important question, actually, and one that probably has to be answered over and over and over until everybody understands it. Quite frankly, if I start where Jerry started, with the company and corporation, that's a core of our business when it comes to financial services. So if I were to give an example, you can see where someone somewhere in the world, let's call her Mary, incorporates a BVI company. Mary does that BVI company then to engage in cross-border activities. I think Lorna and Jerry explained and gave some examples earlier of that. So someone somewhere out there in Timbuktu incorporates this company to go do business. What happens from there is that a fee is earned for government. That fee is usually in the range of $350 or $1,000, depending on some specifics with the company. But that incorporation fee then provides the 65% of government revenue, direct government revenue. That direct government revenue in turn deals with the social programs, public health care. It deals with paying for salaries within government. It deals for effectively anything that government deals with in terms of spending its money. So there we have a large sector of the population that's affected just in terms of social spending. That money in turns then creates other opportunities within the BVI environment. So for example, there's about 16% of our GDP that's linked to financial services. So effectively, about 1/5 of our total economy is actually linked to financial services, because the money flows through in terms of employment, in terms of our construction industries, in terms of our bars or supermarkets, you name it. Then there is about 4,000 to 7,000 jobs that exist within the BVI that's directly attributed to the financial services industry, and you can see how that in turn actually fuels the money that's spent within the economy. And I think a number of people, the ones that aren't directly involved in financial services, believes that financial services, they know it's important, but they don't appreciate how financial services, although they're not directly involved, actually impacts them. I'd like to talk about the construction industry. For example, you have a number of businesses that service the construction industry here in the BVI, whether it's a hardware store, plumbing supply store, concrete supplier, etc. So the man that's involved with those companies, or the man that's employed with those companies, financial services even impacts them, because in the construction field, many of us can't build our homes unless we have jobs that are in these financial services industries. The very buildings that are built to house these financial services business within that construction industry are significantly impacted. So there's a trickle-down effect in industries that seem even unrelated to financial services that has a very, very significant benefit on the ordinary man.
Mr. Penn, you just highlighted the importance of the financial services. You've connected the dots, so to speak, in relation to the different sectors. And Mr. Smith, earlier you spoke about the government's building of our economic relationships. You highlighted FATCA. What else has been done on the international front to strengthen and sustain our services?
Well, many things. One of the important things I believe for the BVI is to ensure that our profile is one that portrays credibility of our treaty partners, those that we interact with in other parts of the world, people that do business with BVI, our use our corporate structures must know that the BVI is a place where the rule of law prevails. We have a stable economy, that our regulatory system, our regulatory regime conforms with international standard, or is better than. That's what we like to hope that it is sometimes. So one of the important things we need to do is to get a message out there and to let people understand, the people that use our structures, that the BVI is doing things that it needs to do. However, there are also various initiatives that have been launched. You have FATCA, Foreign Account Tax Compliance Act from the United States, which the whole world has to subscribe to, basically. And if the BVI is seen, or the BVI does the things that it needs to do as a result of FATCA existing, that improves the credibility of the BVI as well. So we have done, we've negotiated with the United States government, specifically the U.S. Treasury, to ensure that we have an intergovernmental agreement with the United States on a particular initiative. There's the UK FATCA. There's also the Global Forum for Tax Transparency and Exchange Information. That has, we are part of that forum, and that forum basically sets the standard for tax information, for transparency of tax information, cross-border exchange. And we need to make sure that we meet their standards as well, and we've been doing that. We had probably a slight mishap a couple of years ago, so what we've been doing is doing our best to correct the mistakes that we might have made. There's also other things that are coming down the pipe. There's the Common Reporting Standard, which is basically FATCA on steroids. So it's not just FATCA with the United States, where the United States is getting information, but it's, let's say, FATCA for all the countries in the world, well, especially the bigger ones. So we'll have to be exchanging information in the same manner that we exchange with FATCA with a bunch of other countries, all the OECD countries and other countries. So we have to prepare for that. So there are things that we need to do in the BVI in terms of infrastructure, IT systems, make sure that the industry understands what needs to be done. If there are any legislative changes that need to be done, we do those. That is something that we're working on, and we have to move around quite a bit to get the information and to interact with the players on this field. There's also a bit further down the pipe is the base erosion and profit shifting, which could get a little complex for the BVI. But we have to prepare for those things now so that when the actual time comes that the switch is turned on, that the BVI is prepared, that the industry that is here is protected and they're able to survive and thrive in a new environment. This is not something that the government of the Virgin Islands is doing because they want to be awkward. They're doing these things because we need to do them for the survival of the industry. And if we're able to meet those standards and still do the business for which we're noted for in the rest of the world, then we'll not only sustain the economy in its present form, but we'll probably do better than we're doing now. So we have to, and we've been doing, we recognize globally and all these fora where we have to meet and discuss and argue about, how these things should look. At least it be our voice is heard because we actively take part. And it's like basically it's a train that's running, a super tanker that's sailing, and it makes no sense for the BVI to bury his heads in the sand and to say, well, we're not going to participate because we're going to get left behind. So what we need to do and what we've been doing is adjusting, so that 10 years from now, the BVI economy will still be buoyant and successful. So we've been doing that. I've not gone into specifics necessarily. I mentioned the basic on a bird's eye view of the various things we've been doing. But we have to take part, and we need to be proactive when we are ensuring that the BVI economy is buoyant in the future.
You've been watching part 1 of a recap series of the feature edition Public Eye aired on November 18th, where members of the Financial Services Steering Committee discussed the government's plans to build a thriving and sustainable financial services sector. Tune in for part 2 in this series as the committee highlights the benefits of these plans to the territory. We invite you to visit the government website at www.bvi.gov.vg and follow us on Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter at BVI Government.